More now on our breaking news on what appears to be the murder of a new hostage by the terror group ISIS and a new threat to America. We just got video a short time ago of Alan Henning, a British citizen kidnapped months ago on an aid mission, now apparently beheaded by the terrorists. Also in this new tape is a warning about U.S. aid worker Peter Kassig, an Army veteran from Indiana. He had gone overseas to help again. They all try to help, and ISIS does not care. Syrian refugees before being kidnapped. The terrorist today said he's next. All of this comes as a fierce fight rages in Washington over a new book by former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, a man who worked for Bill Clinton and worked for Barack Obama for years, who is now publicly suggesting the Obama administration bears some of the responsibility for this mess we're watching in Iraq and Syria. I put that question to State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki on this program last night. We had basically won the war after those 175,000 troops were there. We had won. The vice president said that Iraq could go down as the administration's greatest success. Things changed after we did the surge in Iraq. We were doing much better. And then the president's critics say we snatched defeat from the jaws of victory because we pulled out the troops and there was no one there to protect the gains.
But, Megan, are you arguing that 10,000 troops or 5,000 troops or 25,000 troops would have been able to fight back against ISIL when 150 or 175,000 couldn't have held back entirely al-Qaeda?
It's not Megyn Kelly arguing it. It's Leon Panetta, who's in a much better position to know. He talks about how I voiced to the president that this country could become a new haven for terrorists to plot attacks against the United States if we withdrew all the forces. Isn't that exactly what happened?
That is not what happened.
Well, the debate did not end there. The White House pushed back today hard, and Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry picks it up from there.
Good evening, Megan. The president's advisors usually don't get into a tit-for-tat over tell-alls, dismissively telling us we don't do book reviews around here. But former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta's memoir is so withering, they are striking back and striking back quickly. Panetta charging in the book that the president's foreign policy, particularly on Syria, has been, in his words, marked by hesitation and half steps. He particularly takes strong umbrage with the president's decision to not move forward with U.S. military action against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad after he used chemical weapons. Panetta saying in the book, quote, "The result, I felt, was a blow to American credibility. When the president, as commander-in-chief, draws a red line, it is critical that he act if the line is crossed. The power of the United States rests on its word. Assad's action clearly defied President Obama's warning. By failing to respond, it sent the wrong message to the world." Now, Vice President Joe Biden has decided to push back on that, as well as Panetta's claim that the president deciding to overrule both the defense secretary and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on whether or not to arm the Syrian rebels made the Syrian crisis much worse. Biden hitting hard on that question. Listen.
I'm finding that former administration officials, as soon as they leave, write books, which I think is inappropriate. But anyway, no, I'm serious. I do think it's inappropriate. At least, give the guy a chance to get out of office.
Now, Panetta does in the book give the president credit for fixing the economy, and he also says he went on offense against terrorists. But Panetta does go after him over Iraq and the question about leaving U.S. troops behind. You've heard the president and his aides say many times that was the fault of the then Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki refusing to give legal immunity to U.S. troops that might stay behind. Panetta says no. The U.S. had a lot more leverage to push Maliki. They could have even threatened to cut off U.S. aid to Iraq, but he says the president was determined to be done with Iraq at all costs. The president, though, for his part, doesn't seem too fazed by the book. On Tuesday, he's doing some fundraising in New York and Connecticut. Wednesday, he goes to the Pentagon in order to get an update on ISIS. But Thursday, he heads out to California for 3 more days of fundraising. Megan?
Ed Henry, thank you. Joining me now, Kirsten Powers, Fox News political analyst, and Chris Direwalt, who's our Fox News digital politics editor. So let's just call it as it is. President Obama's repeated statements that the reason he pulled all those troops out of Iraq was because he couldn't get a status of forces agreement is a misrepresentation. That is a dodge, because what everyone now is saying underneath him, from Panetta to Gates to Clinton, is he could have gotten one if he had pushed harder. She spoke more to the Syrian rebels, but the first two. He could have gotten it if he had pushed harder, as the State Department was urging him to do, as the Defense Department was urging him to do. Is that it, Chris?
Well, look, we see the magnitude of the division in this administration. We see when Leon Panetta talks about our side, he's talking about the Joint Chiefs. He's talking about Hillary Clinton. He's talking about David Petraeus at CIA. He's talking about the hawkish side in the administration in a fight with essentially the political component at the White House over whether or not that would be acceptable. And it's a division that continues to play out to this day when we talk about what is the response to ISIS.
Kirsten, I see that. I said that's fine. Okay, so there was a division between the Pentagon, the State Department, the CIA, the Intel, and the White House. Great. That happens. Barack Obama was elected promising to get us out of Iraq. So have the guts to come out and look at the American people and say, yes, they were telling me to stay, but I ran on a promise to get us out, and I did it, and I stand behind it. Why doesn't he level with us?
I don't know, and I think that this Leon Panetta book is probably the most damning thing that has happened yet, because Panetta has such standing, obviously is in a position to know exactly what happened. He's somebody who has no ideological or partisan axe to grind. He's a loyal Democrat. He's served in the Clinton administration. He was a member of Congress as a Democrat, and this is somebody who I think is telling a very different story. And even if the administration could say, well, we couldn't ultimately get the status of forces agreement, what Panetta is saying is that he doesn't think that they were even willing to try.
Right.
And that's a very different story.
He said there was no leadership, and they refused to exercise the leverage they had.
Yeah, and I also think, look, I mean, his overall, I mean, it's a pretty astonishing, these are astonishing statements, I think, coming from Leon Panetta. He's basically damning his foreign policy. It's not just about the status of forces agreement.
But it cuts right to the issue. It cuts right to the quick, because we are right now in a war in the Middle East. We're bombing parts of the Middle East right now, Chris. But thanks to a president who said we were going to get out of the Middle East. We didn't want to get bogged down there, tied down there. But now we're bombing them. And the question is, how do we get in this position? We've been debating for the last 6 years who had the right foreign policy approach. Was it President Bush, who was so much more aggressive and really thought we should take the fight to the terrorists and have this strong, robust foreign policy and presence? Or was it Barack Obama, who said, if we leave them alone, they're more likely to leave us alone, and I'll do the outreach to the Muslim countries, and this will make us safer? And what we're seeing today is we're not much safer.
Well, certainly the American people don't think so. And I'll put it to you this way, Counselor. Would you buy a used foreign policy from this man? I don't think so. I think that currently the president's credibility, and as KP points out, this book piles on far beyond what we already heard from Robert Gates, what we already heard from Secretary Clinton about what's wrong, about what is essentially a brokenness inside this administration and inside this president about being able to stick in the fight and stay in the hard place and do the politically painful, do the politically uncomfortable thing. And we have seen it in Afghanistan. We see it playing out in horror stories in Libya right now, and we are starting it again. And the record is playing again. And the question is, can this president build a coalition domestically and internationally to deal with this, given a track record that is borne out in a book like this?
It looks like the strings are being pulled by the pollsters or Valerie Jarrett, as we're going to talk about later. But the question is whether we've had an answer on what foreign policy works, and that's why he keeps dodging. I have to ask you this before I let you go, Kirsten. Panetta's a Clinton guy, so is there a political aspect to this? She's going to run. She's been distancing herself from the Obama policies.
I don't think so. I don't think he's not an operator in that way, I don't think. And I think that the kinds of criticism he's making are so substantive and specific. I don't think that he would do that just to try to
and backed up by Hillary Clinton, who's not a Clinton guy. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, this fight over Iraq is the latest in a series of arguments about what the government says is happening and what appears to actually be happening. Is this creating a crisis of confidence? Governor Mike Huckabee is here on that. Plus, breaking news next on new steps to quarantine more Americans possibly infected with or at least exposed to Ebola, and whether or not the feds can prevent new cases from flying to the United States. Can the president do it, or can't he? Wait until you hear the answer.
The CDC last week said the chance of importing Ebola was infinitesimal, and that was the same day the patient was misdiagnosed in Dallas.